Hello and welcome to the course of UPSC 2019 GS Papers Analysis. So here is the course presented to you by Plus Prameshi Library, and here we are trying to do what we are trying to do is basically come up with these papers which have happened in the past in the mains. Okay, so UPSC has three stages: prelims, mains and interview. So prelims we are already creating separate courses, but for mains the most important part is answer writing, and it's very important to understand that how an answer should be written. So what we are doing here is we are trying to cover two complete papers of 2019 and 18, and then we will also take up some fresh questions from GS1, GS2, GS3 as well as GS4. Okay, essay series will be made, but it will be made separately, but not in this course, because essay has a altogether completely different requirement. Before we move forward, you should know that writing mains is another, you can say it's altogether another experience, and for that you need to have specific skill. So answer writing is not easy as such, because you need to practice it. For what? Practice for, first of all, the time. There are 20 questions asked and you have to write them in 3 hours, which is a challenging task because lot of people are not able to complete their papers. Okay. Secondly, see, in time, even if you're able to write, you have to ensure that you write quality. You just don't have to focus on quantity, because if you know that already, if you see some toppers marks, you will realize that the highest they're getting out of 250 is somewhere around 120, 125. But that too only one or two people. The majority of people are falling in 80, 90 bracket, and that is why they're not able to clear this exam. But if you like evenly secure around 105, 110 in all the GS papers, you will find that you have easily got your name in the rank list. Okay. So what you need to do is you need to ensure that you have these marks around 105 to 110 range, which means that you have to write quality answers. Okay, so not only the quantity but quality also has to be the focus of your answer writing. And to actually ensure that we are giving our best to you, so that you can start practicing your mains answer writing from now, so that by the time mains you appear for mains, you are actually thorough with the part of answer writing. So here is the course that we have come up. And before we move forward, this you should know something about me, the educator, your mentor for the course. So this is Supriya Singhal. I have appeared for the Indian Forest Services interview also, as well as the Civil Services interview. And I've also written RAS Mains 2019. And this is my Instagram account. I know a lot of educators actually give their personal links like Telegram, etc. But for me, this is my food blog. And I have been running this food blog for quite some time now, and so I feel that I'm much more active on Instagram than any other platform. So it's a very great way to connect to me and also see some amazing recipes. Okay, also some good food and good stories. So we will start with the GS1 paper, but before we start any paper, I request to you to please see that year's paper and check for these, that which subject got the maximum weightage. So that will tell you that how much focus you should be giving, not just on the basis of one paper, but take like past 5 years papers or something and see that which subject is getting more weightage in the GS papers, and then prepare start preparing accordingly. Don't waste so much time on world history when number of questions asked are less, and this has been a trend for almost like now 5 to 6 years, that the questions being asked from the world history, they are either one or two, and only in 1 year I remember there were 5 questions, but after that they have only asked one, or like there have been years when they have asked even 0 question also. So now the point is, should you be wasting that much time on world history as you are like taking to cover probably the other part, for example modern history or art and culture? Answer is no. So the weightage, if you see, of modern history, there are 4 questions, two 10 markers and two 15 markers, but in world history there is only one question. So this is what I'm telling you. Please do this analysis. So we'll be doing this analysis for 2019 and 2018 paper, but you need to do this analysis for all the papers starting from 2015 or 2016. Okay, and check for the trend and then accordingly prepare your subjects. The first, I think the doubt is clear, which was asked by a lot of people also, who were asking that which subject to focus on, etc. Now the second part is, before we move forward, since I'm assuming that a lot of people might be beginners here, you should know that UPSC has this so when you have to write answers, right? So UPSC has a set standard paper, okay, wherein you have to write an answer. So you will find that the paper looks something like this, wherein there are already margins drawn, so you don't have to draw a margin. So there is like UPSC written on the top, then there are something written, then you can't write anything in this space because this is left for the teacher, and then there is space given in the end. So you have to write only in this particular square or rectangular thing that you can see in the middle. Now when I say that a particular question, so there are in any GS paper, okay, GS 1, 2 and 3, not the essay paper, not the ethics and not the essay paper, because they have a little different marking system. So in GS papers 1, 2 and 3, you will find that the answer writing, okay, answer writing has two kinds of questions. One are the 10 marker questions and other are the 15 marker questions. Now this particular pattern you can say evolved only in last 2-3 years, because the pattern was different before. Okay, so answer writing pattern might keep on changing, but you should understand that there will always be two kinds of questions that UPSC will be asking. So there is 10 marker questions and there is 15 marker questions. Now the catch here is that in 10 marker questions you have to write only 150 words, while in 15 marker questions you have to write 250 words. So what UPSC does is, instead of you going like a board on the question and you writing 7-8 pages on one question and then writing none in another, they've actually divided the entire booklet, like the answer booklet, in such a way that each question is written on the top, then you are given some blank pages, then there is another question number 2, then there are blank pages. So you cannot exceed the limit which has been set by UPSC anyway. Okay, so what they do is, suppose if it's a 150 words question or a 10 marker question, you are given 2 pages, okay, basically front and back. But if it's a 250 words question or a 15 marker question, then you are given 3 pages, back, front, back, and then again the next page front. So you have 3 pages to write. So I will tell you, whenever you are practicing also mains answer writing, the important part is that please, if you are even using rough copies, please draw these margins, because what will happen when we practice, we take the entire A4 page and we start writing from the top, and we think that UPSC is giving 2 pages, so we finish at the next page's end. But the point is, UPSC is actually cutting these margins. Now imagine, if you draw these margins, actually whatever you have written, only of that you should have written half. And that is why I always say, practice the way UPSC is asking. Otherwise, you will be actually facing a lot of difficulties in the real examination. Okay, so my request to you is, since we are discussing GS papers, if you have these booklets, great. Otherwise, these booklets can also be found on the Plus Prameshi Library website, and you can find them even in the and any bookstore also. They're easily available. So either buy these booklets, or if you don't want to do that, if you have free time, if you can get your parents engaged in this quarantine time also, just give them like 150 to 200 pages, and I think more than that, because one answer booklet easily takes up so 3 into 10 is 30, plus 10 into 2 is 20. So one answer booklet should be taking 50 pages. Okay, so that means if you want like 5-6 question answer booklets also, so around 300 pages you can sit with, and give it to your parents, give it to your siblings. Anyways, they are free right now, so give it to them and ask them to draw these margins. Okay, and when you draw these margins, you will realize that you have an answer booklet ready. And if you don't want to do this much of hard work, you can just order it from the Prameshi Library's website. Okay, and then start answer writing. So what I'll be doing is, I'll be discussing each question, like 20 questions for sure in detail. And instead of just going how other institutes go by it, okay, this you might have covered, this you should have done this, and I will tell you exactly how to start with intro, then what should be there in the mains and what should be there in the conclusion. First part. Second part, I'll be telling you that in a 10 marker question, like the point is, you and me both have studied from the same books, almost same content. We all are studying NCRTs, we all are studying Tamil Nadu books for histories. Okay, we all are reading almost the same sort of material. Then how are your answers and my answer different? If an examiner is checking, how will you ensure that your answer has that one element that examiner feels that you should be given at least 1 or 2 marks higher than the copies which are just before or after you? So that difference lies in the way you present, the way you write, and the way you, and some modalities that you have in your answer. Okay, for example, my strong point is 2 things: A, diagrams, and second, statistics. Okay, I know a lot of people do not remember statistics, but I remember statistics very well. So what I do is, I draw graphs, I give statistical numbers. So this is what is my strength. Now you need to analyze what is your strength. Some people have strengths in writing paragraphs, like they have very amazing English, like flair of English. So if you tell them to write in points, it's a disaster. So here I will break one more myth. So actually, there are institutes which are telling you that you should only write in paragraphs or you should only write in points. I'm telling you again, do not fall for such myths. Okay, you can write in either of the ways. If you have to write the answer, you can write in the paragraph form also, like introduction paragraph, then there is a mains paragraph, and then there is a conclusion paragraph. Or you can write it in the form of points, like introduction paragraph, and then mains body in points, point number 1, 2, 3, 4, or you can use bullets, and then there is conclusion. There is absolutely no problem in solving in any of these, writing your answers in any of these two ways. Okay, UPSC is not going to decide your answers on the basis of, how the pattern you have written, but definitely on the content that you have written, and at least you have covered the three parts: introduction, conclusion, and body, main body. So if you have a good flair of English, write it in paragraphs. If you don't have, then I suggest that please use the points, because in points you save a lot of connecting words like and, or, the, hence, therefore. All these words are gone, and this saves you page also, space also, and the word limit also, because most of the time you'll be finding that you are exceeding the word limit. Okay, see, as long as you're using 2 pages, okay, and it seems that you have given enough space in between, they are not going to count your words. But if you like write small also, if you do not give space, and then you are like filling 2 pages, that shows that you've already exceeded the word limit, and marks can be deducted for it. So do not fall for any such pits and you will find wells when you already know that this is not the way of going around it. Okay, now, after understanding how to write an answer, where should we be writing the answer, now we will take the GS paper 1 2019's analysis, and we will see how many questions came from what particular chapter. So before we proceed, you should actually see what is the GS1 syllabus including. So GS1 syllabus is, I will say, a paper which is very easy, and it is always scoring. Why? Because this has most of static portion. Okay, like most of static portion plus some little bit of current affairs that can be said to be coming from environment or geography interrelated part, but not from anywhere else. So GS1 has basically, first of all, history, a lot of history. Okay, it has ancient history, medieval history, modern history, post-independence history, and world history. So 5 histories. Apart from it, it also has art and culture. Okay, then apart from it, it has geography. Now geography, you'll be studying only Indian geography for the prelims, but here you will find there is also world geography. So Indian geography, world geography, human geography, everything is there in GS1. Okay, so all of history, all of geography. Then you also have disasters. Okay, some part of disasters, and then some part of environment here also. This disaster and environment part will also come in GS paper 3, and that is why I tell you, never ever prepare for GS papers in seclusion, because you will find that there were questions asked about Juno, which is specifically a scientific mission sent to Jupiter by NASA, which should come in GS3, but the question was asked in the GS1. Why? Because they related it to the discovery of universe, and discovery of universe forms the part of your geography. So they can relate it to any way, and you cannot question it. The point is that prepare your, when you are doing your preparation, prepare it holistically. So it doesn't matter to you whether they are asking it in GS1 or GS3. Okay, and then GS1 also has basically Indian society. So Indian society and the social issues, etc. Social issues are also found in GS2, because there is a concept of social justice which is explicitly mentioned in GS2. So here also you can find an overlap between GS paper 1 and GS paper 2. But society as such, everything about society will come in basically GS1. So now let's just see the number of questions that have appeared in GS1 from these particular topics. So this is according to a very crude classification we have done, because we have not divided into environment and then current affairs, because this is just making it more complicated for you to understand. Okay, so here if you can see that art and culture only got 1 question of 10 marks. Then modern history has a great weightage which has basically 4 questions, 2 of 10 marks and 2 of 15 marks. Indian society has again great weightage with 6 questions. And mind my words, this was a subject that people used to leave, because Indian society you do not get very comprehensive notes from somewhere, and you do not have any very like a material like you can say that this is the NCERT and you should read it. So Indian society was the most neglected subject, but UPSC ensured that after 2018, okay, 2018's paper and 2019 paper was a bouncer for society. Like so many questions, like 5 to 6 questions of society came, and people were just in shock that they have left society, because society was like, okay, what is it? We will write about it. There is nothing to read. But if you read, you use those terms and you get more marks. So that is why I tell you, do not fall for myths and pits. Okay, always just see the papers and then see for yourself that what is right and what is wrong. So Indian society has achieved a great weightage, and specifically after 2018. I'm mentioning it here. Then world history has been, you can say, since last 5 years it has been the same only, like one or two questions maximum, not more than that. So here you can see only one question came, and that too it was very very easy. It was from the static portion of world history. So world history, if you see, there are a lot of events. Okay, you must be wondering, like, world history is such a vast topic, and it's actually very boring also. So you have to start from Renaissance, then you have to study reformation which is happening in Europe, etc. Then you go to industrial revolution, then you studied about American revolution, French revolution, Russian revolution, then all these world wars. And after these world wars also, you have these Korean peninsula wars. Okay, you have this oil crisis, you have Gulf problems, then you have this Iraq Iran invasion problem. So all these things, okay, going even till 1991, when you have this Berlin Wall getting abolished, and then you have basically USSR or Soviet Union basically getting disintegrated. So all these, including till 1998 India's nuclear doctrine. So all this, forms the part of world history. Now the point is, it's on your intelligence, where do you want to limit it, because there is no end to knowledge. Okay, you can read a lot, you can study a lot, you can study about Afghanistan also, because Afghanistan, all the invasion that started in 1970s by Soviet, and then how US came in 2000, and specifically after their attack on Pentagon, and then Osama bin Laden was killed. So all these things also form the part of world history. But do you have to read all this, is a question that I leave open to you, because world history has no defined parameter. There was a question, a bouncer question, that was asked by UPSC in, I think, previous year, wherein they asked about the Indo-Malayan, okay, Indo-Malayan independence. Basically, these are those, Indo-Malayan, or I think Indo-Malayan or Indo-China region they asked. Basically, it was about the countries like CLMV countries or Indonesia, Thailand, and how did they achieve independence. Now, this particular topic, I'm telling you, nobody has included it. Similarly, there was one question about the Western Africa and independence. Okay, now this is like an bouncer question. Okay, if you don't know it, nobody knows it, because in mains it's not like prelims. Now, mains everybody has something to write, but if you're not getting even one line to write, there is nobody who will get it. So all you need to do is get calm and composed, and sit and think that how you can attempt this question, and at least write at least a page, because if you blabber more, you'll end up actually hurting the examiner. So you don't have to blabber, but you have to make sure that you're not writing anything. You have to write something that is relevant, but it might fetch you only 2 marks or 3 marks, but 3 marks are also important if you want to make your name in that rank list. Okay, and then you have Indian and world geography, which has basically maximum questions 8. So you can see geography, then society, then history, or modern history are becoming the most important chapters if we talk about the GS paper 1 of 2019. Now, after discussing all this and the basics that we should know, we'll start with the paper. So here what I have done is, see, model answers, if you want it, then you should write it in the comment box, because what is happening is, we know that there is lot of content and material available out there. Okay, so model answers might not be a priority that you be looking for. What you should be looking for is how to write an answer, because this part is not covered discovered anywhere. Okay, so that is what we are trying to do. So first question we'll take is basically question number 1, which belongs to your art and culture section. So it wants you to highlight the Central Asian as well as the Greco-Bactrian elements in the Gandhara art. Now, this question is very very static, because everybody has studied about the Gandhara art. Okay, and where have we studied it? We have studied it in the post-modern, basically art and culture section, wherein we study about the sculpture making. And in sculpture making, we talk about 3 kinds of sculpture making arts. One was Gandhara, other was Mathura, and third was Vengi. So, okay, so now this becomes your introduction. Okay, so see, I'll be telling you what is introduction, what you have to write in main body, and then what should be your conclusion. Okay, now first of all, if I have to attempt this question, it is specifically asking me that I have to highlight 2 things. That there is a Gandhara art, I have to highlight what are the Central Asian elements in this, and what are the Greco-Bactrian elements in this. So what I'll do is, I'll start with an introduction. This part will be in my mains, like this main body, and finally I'll conclude it, whatever I've written on the basis of that. Now, introduction should not be 1 page long. Okay, I've seen introductions which are 1 page long, and it just, I'm just confused as to, is the introduction the answer, or is like answer coming next page? So you don't have to do it. Introduction can be like 4 to 5 lines maximum, wherein you're trying to introduce and tell the examiner that you know what is Gandhara art, because this is the main feature. Like, this is the main thing that is getting asked. So just introduce it in the introduction section, and then go on to the real question that has been asked in the main body. Okay, so now if I have to start, I will say that Gandhara art was one of the sculpture making arts which is present in the post-modern period. Okay, this is the first point. Then second I will write that Gandhara art was basically present around the region of Gandhara, okay, which was at the crossroads of like many trade routes going from east to west as well as north to south. Now I have, what I've done is, now I have set up premise, or I have set up pretext as to what is that I'm trying to tell. And then third point I'll write, that is why we find that Gandhara has basically influence of both indigenous as well as the external, or the other empires, for example Central Asian or the Greco-Bactrian elements. And that is how I come to my main body. Okay, so understood how beautifully in 3 sentences I've written what I know about Gandhara, and I've also told that I'm shifting towards the main body and I'm not diverging. I'm just telling you and then I'm moving. So this is how you should start with your answer writing. Now in the main body, what you will do is, see, if I had to attempt this question, what I will do is, first of all I'll make a diagram, because that's what I know the best. So I know how to make a Buddha, and it will not take more than 2 minutes. So you can actually count. Okay, so this is the Gandhara Buddha. Okay, I'll be making, not the this one. And then sorry, just a second, I lost the pen only. And then there is beard, and then there is mustache. Okay, and then okay, and then you have ears, which has like these earlobes. Now this is like a rough diagram of Buddha that you have made, and you can write here the Gandhara Buddha. Okay, now trust me, this is something that nobody will make, and 2 minutes spent on this will ensure that you get 2 more marks. In spite of writing that one line extra that you might have written somewhere here or there, or 2 lines, if you draw this, you're gonna fetch definitely more marks than anybody else writing the paper. Okay, now if you have drawn this, now you can say that, as even seen in the diagram, we can say that the Gandhara art had distinctively Central Asian as well as the Greco-Bactrian elements present in them. Okay, and now start writing about the pointers which are Greco-Roman in nature and then which are Central Asian in nature. First of all, how is it Greco-Roman? We all know that the Gandhara art, the Buddha was shown, basically Buddha was very closely associated to the Roman god Apollo, so you should mention the name of Apollo. Okay, then secondly you should write, just like in the Greek gods you have seen that there is wavy hair and there is like a bun on the top, etc., and then like there is mustache, etc., and you look more manly. So here also you will find that the Buddha is looking one of the similar features. Then in the Roman empire and the Greek empire, the Roman Bactrian elements, you will find that they have like their men have long earrings. Okay, they have long earrings, they have long earlobes, and then so I mean the face is also quite long. So this is what you need to write. What you're doing is you are actually trying to demarcate between the Central Asian and between the Greco-Bactrian elements present in the Gandhara art, and finally you will conclude, because this question is no analysis question. This is a straightforward factual question, but I'm telling you how to score more in this particular question. Okay, so little bit of creativity can actually take you from here to here. Okay, and then after writing like 4-5 elements of, see, since it's a 10 marker question, writing introduction has already taken 30 words. So out of 150 words, only 120 words are left. Okay, out of 120 words, 20 words or 10 words will be your conclusion. So you have technically 100 words for your answer. In 100 you divide it as like 50 words for Greco-Bactrian and 50 words for Central Asian. So in Greco-Bactrian, basically 50 words mean 4 features, and similarly you have to write only 3 to 4 features about the Central Asian thing that they are having. For example, the clothes that they are wearing, the robes that they have, like the folds that they have on their body. Okay, the posture that they are sitting in, because this is a very common posture that you might have found even in the Central Asian empire, who are the specifically Buddhist followers. Okay, because this is basically Mahayana Buddhism, right? So now in this way, what you will do, 4 features of Greco-Bactrian, 4 features of Central Asian, and after drawing the diagram, after writing 4 and 4 features of Buddha from both of these parts, you will basically conclude that Gandhara art, okay, Gandhara art basically so since actually you know what, you do not need a conclusion here, because the question is asking you to highlight only. So you just highlight the elements. You have started with introduction, you have given the main body. In conclusion, if you want to write, you can write that thus we see that Gandhara hat has features of both, but this is just a repetition. Since there is no analysis involved here, you do not need to write conclusion. And this is what I tell you, do not follow the same introduction, main body, conclusion pattern for all the questions. Okay, you do not need to, because if a question is not asking you to analyze something, what are you concluding? It is already concluded, so you don't need to write a conclusion. But for your satisfaction, that you feel that I should write, you can write a line, but then don't exceed it, because this question does not need a conclusion. It is only asking you a factual thing. You go with the diagram, you write the points, and you are done with the answer. Before we move forward, it is asked that if it is written 150 words, do we have to write 150 words? Answer is no. 150 is the maximum. You can write 120, 130, but you can't write 100. Okay, so there is a limit. 150 plus minus 10 and 20 here and there is fine. But if you exceed, like if you make 150 250, and if you make 150 50, this is not acceptable. Okay, with this we'll move to the second question. So the second question is from the modern history, wherein the spelling of the modern has become wrong. So the modern history question is about the 1857 uprising. No, the question is something different, but it relates to 1857 uprising. So the 1857 uprising was the culmination of the recurrent big and small local rebellions that had occurred in the preceding 100 years of British rule. Elucid. So elucidate, okay, this is elucidate. I don't know how it has got wrong. So elucidate it is. So elucidate means what? See, we will take one session on different words. Elaborate, elucidate, illustrate. Okay, then there is discuss. Then there is like there are many, like critically analyze, and there is analyze. So here what we'll do is, since we have already started with the paper, so we'll finish the paper, but if you demand, then we will take a session on the different meanings of each of these words, and then what you have to actually write when these words are given. Okay, for now just take whatever I am giving, and like write the, so this question is about elucidate. So elucidate means that you have to prove by giving examples that this was the case. This is not asking you that this is true or not. They have assumed that this is true, and this is the difference. When you are asked to actually critically analyze, there you can say a particular statement is given in the question is wrong or right. Here there is no question of wrong and right. And I know a lot of people here made the mistake. This actually started telling that how 1857 uprising was basically culmination, but then it was also a standalone uprising, which is wrong. You don't have to write it, because they are not asking you. They've assumed that this statement is true, and now they are just asking you to prove it right. Okay, with certain examples. Please, I'm telling you, these questions, they look like one liner, but they have so much in them, and if you don't understand it, you will actually fall in a pitfall. So do not do that. Okay, so this question is asking you about the uprisings that might have taken place before 1857, okay, and which finally would have contributed to what we call as the 1857 uprising. Okay, so somewhere it is telling you that that angst against British, or the rebellion that took place in 1857, was not just one of those standalone elements, but in 100 years, like preceding 100 years, starting from 1757, there were smaller uprisings and rebellions here and there going on, which finally basically became so big that it took a shape of 1857 uprising. So now I hope the question is clear, and we will now start with the answer. So what will you write? See, so first of all, here you again need to have introduction, main body, and conclusion. Okay, so now first of all you will write something about the 1857 uprising, because see, question is mentioning it. If they do not want to mention 1857 uprising, they could have asked that there were recurrent big and small rebellions that occurred between 1757 to 1857. But if they are mentioning 1857 uprising, that means you need to actually put it somewhere in the answer. So there is, the best part to put is basically introduction. So you will write that 1857 uprising, also called as the first war of independence by V.D. Savarkar. Okay. Basically 1857 uprising, also called as the first war of independence by V.D. Savarkar, was, okay, you can say was a landmark event in India's independence history. Okay, but you can say, but here you will also write, but there were many small and big uprisings that took place, okay, before 1857, which might have culminated into 1857 uprising. So now you have introduced the question, and you have also told the examiner that you are not actually getting sidelined from what has been asked. So you have introduced, but you have also said that you are moving towards this second part in the main body. So now here in this main part, I will tell you two ways to answer this question. Okay, what are those two ways? The first way is basically you writing about certain specific rebellions that you remember, and you write them in detail. So here, since it's a 150 word question, I think at least writing five events, okay, 5 events in detail will be a good idea. And if you take them from different spheres, like one where probably a ruler might have revolted, one where peasants might have revolted, one where tribals might have revolted, so something like that. So basically 5 revolts and 5 different events you can take. All you can do is you can divide it into 4 parts: peasant rebellion, tribal rebellions, then you can say civil uprisings, and then ruler uprising or whatever, and then here you can give examples each one of them. So now it's dependent on your knowledge and what you remember. If you remember a lot of events and you can actually classify them into civil, peasant, tribal, then I should say that you should go with this. But if you don't remember, which I think is 90% the case, then what you should do is that you should actually go with this particular pattern of answer writing, wherein instead of going with such a hefty method where you have to remember like 20 uprisings, even if you remember 6, you'll be able to write a beautiful answer. So what you are already have introduced, you must have seen that you've already introduced that you are going to write about the uprisings that took place before 1857. So now what you do is you think of the uprisings that happened before 1857. Okay, for example, there was Sannyasi rebellion. Okay, then you can think of the Paika rebellion, which was in news 1817 also, which was being thought of being named as the first war of independence. Then there was Polygar rebellion. Okay, then you will find that there was Vellore mutiny that took place in 1809 or 18, like somewhere around this time. Then similarly you will find that there were other peasant uprisings also. Okay, and then there was like Chu uprising. Okay, Chu uprising, then Munda also, which took place as the tribal uprisings. Now you know already so much. Okay, the point is you just have to write about these 6 events in like 2 lines, and your whole page will be covered. And the next you will write, and then you can write the conclusion. So Sannyasi rebellion, see, either you write the year, okay, and then you write and then you write about the if you know, then you write about the person who started it or the person who was the ruler. And if there is any book or any particular event that you know is related to Sannyasi rebellion, then you should also write that. Okay, so Sannyasi rebellion, just like that. Then similarly Paika rebellion, you should write how it started in 1817. It was by the, basically you can say, the people who were living in the Khurda region, okay, which was the militant peasant class, and why they revolted and how they revolted against the Britishers. Okay, then similarly Polygar rebellion by the local, you can say, rulers, and who were ousted. So it was by these rulers against the Britishers. Similarly was the Vellore mutiny, and this was basically, see, Vellore mutiny took place, why? It took place because Anglo-Mysore war took place, and in that you will find that Tipu Sultan lost the battle of Srirangapatnam, and his 2 sons were taken by the Britishers. So they were kept in Vellore, and they finally raised a flag in Vellore, which became the Vellore mutiny, because they wanted the independence. Okay, now similarly these tribal uprisings, you will write about the Cho uprising, Munda uprising, and say that how these uprisings were actually not against the Britishers but against the Dikkus. And Dikkus are basically the outsiders who, like outsiders in the sense Indian or Britishers, who are trying to invade the tribal way of life, the tribal culture, the tribal, the tribal, you can say the daily activities, like everything about tribes. So what is happening? So what you will do is you will mention that, see, that why these tribal uprisings are happening, because there were so many tribal uprisings. You can just give like a short note, as in the tribal uprisings were taking place against the Dikkus, and Britishers were one amongst them. Okay, and they were taking place because Dikkus were coming and invading the tribal way of life, their culture, and their economic activities like of hunting and gathering and grazing, etc., was also impacted. They were no longer allowed to go inside the forest and collect the fuel wood, etc., which obviously impacted impacted their daily lives. Okay, and not only this, also the zamindars, okay, coming from the other regions were coming and invading their land, buying their property and converting the forest into agricultural land, which was also bad because somewhere they were losing the rights on their own land. So this way, instead of writing like about these little uprisings in tribals, what you have done is you have actually consolidated the reason and then you have written. And after this, like in the conclusion, you will write that although that you will write that these uprisings, okay, these uprisings which have been going on since 100 years, okay, you can say that filled the feeling, okay, of independence, of you can say independence in the Indians, okay, in the different sections of Indians, and finally we see basically 1857 uprising. So this way you have actually concluded on the positive note, saying that how you recognize the importance of these smaller uprisings. Okay. Then we go to the third question. But this question, I will take it together with another question of modern Indian history, wherein they're asking about the 1940s, like the events that happened in 1940s. So what we'll do is we'll move on to a question from Indian geography, which is basically to assess the impact of global warming on the coral life system with example. This is a very interesting question, and just take a minute because coral life and coral reefs have been in news this time, specifically because global warming has increased and global temperatures have increased. And if you have been reading newspapers, you might have seen that Great Barrier Reef, okay, the Great Barrier Reef was basically bleached. There was a mass bleaching that took place, and like lot of corals were lost. So see, I mean, that is what I say, that geography is integrated with environment and then with current affairs. So geography questions, statics are less, but environment, current affairs questions are more. Just read the question and then we will start with the answer. So here you will find, again we have to divide it into introduction, main body and conclusion part. Okay, so it is asking you to assess in the sense that you have to give your own views also as to what is the, what do you think is right and why is it happening, and can you tell a way to actually, in like 2-3 lines, can you tell a way that how do we stop it. Okay, so you have to assess the impact of global warming on the coral life system with example. With example is the most important part, because what people did was they actually told the impact of global warming, but they did not write where is it happening. Okay, so you can't do this, you have to write this. Okay, so what you will do is, see, either there are two ways to attempt this question. Either you know specific like 4 examples. For example, there is a Great Barrier Reef example. Then similarly, there is an example of coral triangles. Okay, then there is an example of Lakshadweep. Okay, Lakshadweep and Maldives also. Okay, similarly, you might have seen that there might be another example that you can come up with. So now 4 examples you know, and with these 4 examples you can say that this particular event of global warming impacted this, then this and this. But this, like this method, I will say is a little difficult, specifically when you are under pressure of writing an examination, because things won't like appear to you in your mind, and you will start you will end up writing same reason for global warming also for all of these 4. So it's better that I'll give you another way to attempt a question. So how we will do is, in introduction you will mention about the global warming first, okay, and I'll tell you the beautiful way to introduce it. Then you will go on to main body, and here what you will write is the impact of global warming on the coral reef systems. Okay, and once you have written like 4-5 impacts, and then you will say basically examples. Okay, and in examples you can mention 3 or 4 whatever you remember, and in the conclusion you will end on a positive note by telling that how coral reefs need to be protected to save biodiversity. Okay, so this is like the entire structure of your answer. Okay, now we will understand in detail how to write the introduction. Okay, so first of all you will write that global warming, okay, refers to the sustained increase in temperatures, okay, sustained increase in temperatures of the earth, and in the bracket you can write as UNEP to tell the examiner that this definition has come from the United Nations Environment Program. Now after writing global warming you will write that you have written the definition, and now you will write that it is witnessed by increasing CO2, increasing temperatures and increasing CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. So here you have mentioned that you not only know the definition, but you know that how you can measure global warming, and here you will draw 2 graphs. Now, if you want me to take a graph making session separately, let me know in the comment box so that we can have graph making session, and I will tell you how to make graphs, so that you can make them in your answers. So here what you will do is you will write CO2 concentration in ppm, okay, and then you will write here numbers, then you will write here years basically, okay, and you will write 1980s, and here you probably 1950s, and then here you will write basically, sorry, 1850s, and here you will write 2018. So here you will show a consistent rise, and then here you will write 400 ppm, because last year it was in news that CO2 concentration in atmosphere has already reached above 400 ppm. So now see, instead of writing that entire paragraph, you've just made one diagram and shown the examiner two things: A, your succinct knowledge, and secondly, how do you present it. And here you will write basically temperature and of earth, and then you will write in bracket degree Celsius, and here you will write the year, and here you will show how this has also increased, and how the temperature, which was earlier 15 degrees, average temperature of earth has now reached to around 16 degrees. So that shows that there is a 1 degree rise in temperature in the earth. Okay, after writing this in the introduction, see, you might be thinking that introduction is long, but this is not. This will, see, this is hardly 20 words, and this another is just the diagram that can be fitted anywhere. Now after this, what you will do is you will come to the main part, main body, and you will write that global warming has impacted coral reef system very badly. Okay, and how does it impact in following ways? So first you will write that ocean acidification, okay, then second you will write coral bleaching, okay, then you will also write about the decreasing biodiversity, okay, then you will write about the problem of you can say problem of oxygen, or you can write here as hypoxia, situation of hypoxia, okay. But before you write all this, I'll tell you to write a report which is IPCC special 1.5 degree Celsius report, which mentions that if the earth's temperature increases beyond 2 degrees Celsius, we will lose more than 97% of our corals. If this line you have written and underlined, trust me, and if this graph you have made, you have already out of 10 gotten somewhere around 5. Even if you have not written other parts, you've already gotten like 5 marks because of just these two things. Okay, now what you will do is, after writing first of all in mains that global warming has impacted coral reef systems badly as indicated by the special IPCC special 1.5 degree Celsius report. Okay, so then you will write here that first of all, because of the increasing global warming, the ocean, see, there is, before this you will write ocean warming also. So there has been rising temperature of ocean warming, and if the ocean warms up, there is an increasing temperature of the ocean, then what happens that the gases dissolved in the ocean actually reduces. If the gases reduces, that means the oxygen is reducing, so the biodiversity that is living there will be facing problems of getting more oxygen to live. So that will lead to reducing biodiversity. Second, if the ocean is warming, what will it lead to? It will also lead to, you will find acidification. Okay, and if there is acidification, that means the carbonates present will get dissolved. And if the carbonates get dissolved, then coral reefs will not be able to build, because we know that coral polyps are basically what? They are the calcium carbonate systems. If carbonate only dissolves and there is no carbonate, how will the reef build? So the reef will get impacted. And the third is the problem of association, symbiosis. So we know that coral reef is a symbiosis between algae and the corals. Okay, so algae is the one which is providing food, and coral is the one basically which is giving the surface to attach on. So if you see here, let's just like remove this. So if you see here, then this is like a coral, okay, on which what is happening, this algae, which is also called as zooxanthellae, gets attached, and this algae is responsible for the color. Okay, so if algae gets detached because of acidification, salinization, like carbonate dissolution, then algae is separated, like zooxanthellae is separated, and then there is only white color corals, which we also called as the decoloration of corals. Okay, and this was what was observed in Australia. Now, decoloration of coral is an indication that your coral reef system is in danger. But if you provide them good conditions again, these algae will attach back. But if you sustain these bad conditions for a long time, you will find that algae will permanently detach, and finally the corals will become dead. So they are alive, but they are in a bad condition. Like you can say something, something being on a ventilator or an ICU. But if you actually give them good conditions and good care, they come back again. So that is what is happening. So then you provide ventilator to this coral reef system, and it will get alive back again. Okay, so this is called as discoloration or decoloration of corals, which ultimately leads to mass bleaching. So here I have told you the impact of global warming on the coral's life and the coral biodiversity also. Then as examples, you will write first of all the example of Great Barrier Reef. Okay. Then secondly, you will write the example of Coral Triangle, where also you will find that Coral Triangle is the area which has the maximum number of corals. Then how basically corals are getting impacted. And one more thing is, which I have forgot to mention, is the changing ocean currents. See, actually, if you know that corals are not found in the areas where basically there is turbidity or there are two ocean currents meeting, because then they won't get it won't be a stable atmosphere, like stable you can say condition. But what is happening is, because of the temperature changes and global warming, ocean currents are also changing their path, and this is becoming important. This has become a trouble for the coral reefs, which were now until stable. So this also can be one of the impacts of the global warming. Now examples: Great Barrier Reef, then coral triangles, and then third will be Lakshadweep Island. Okay, how they have faced mass bleaching problems and how they are facing decoloration problems. Already, like Coral Triangle, you will find that corals have been impacted really badly, and then there is pollution also, oil spills also. Okay, but that you don't have to mention, because here it is asking you about global warming, not about the man-made effects. Okay, and then you have to write about the Lakshadweep Islands, and finally in the conclusion you will write that how coral reefs are important harbors of biodiversity. Okay, they are important for social, economic, and environmental reasons, and we should protect them. Okay, this is how you will end to ensure that and we should protect them, and thus we should actually minimize or reduce the effects of global warming. We should minimize or reduce global warming and also the effects of it or impact of it on the coral system. In this way, you have made an entire 150 word answer in such a beautiful, like it's like those motis, right? Like those pearls which are like together in that one string. It's just like that. It's such a beautiful, beautiful answer. So it's a request that please write such beautiful answers that you get more marks also. Okay. Now we will move towards the question number 5. So the question number 5 is asking you to discuss the causes of depletion of mangroves and also to explain the importance in maintaining coastal ecology. Okay, now this question is very easy, and it's a direct for like environment and current affairs related question, and it can be called to be a part of geography because there you discuss about the mangroves. Now before I start, please take a minute, pause the video and see if you can at least get some points that you can write in introduction, mains and the conclusion part. So I'm hoping that you might have done this, and now we will start with the answer writing. So first of all, you should divide the question into two parts because it is asking you to specifically mention two parts, and this is how your answer should also be divided. First is the causes of depletion of mangroves, and second is the importance in maintaining coastal ecology. So when I'm writing my answer, like after introduction, I will specifically write a point here of causes of depletion of mangroves, and secondly the importance of mangroves in maintaining coastal ecology. So this way examiner can see that I've answered both parts separately, and he will see that he'll give me more marks also, because he doesn't have to do mehnat of finding whether I've answered one part or not. I've given headings and I've answered. Okay, so in introduction you will write that mangroves, okay, are important, but you do not have to write why they're important because this is the second part of the question. Okay, so you can say here that mangroves are an important ecotone species. Okay, herein you bring your knowledge of environment, that they are an ecotone species, okay, which are basically found at the culmination, or you can say the culmination of land as well as water, because they are found in those areas where land and water are meeting. So that is why you're calling them as ecotone species. And mark this word ecotone so that examiner knows, oh my god, you remember. Okay, because in mains problem is that people don't remember what they've studied in prelims. Okay, so you, first of all, point is this. Then secondly, you will also write that mangroves, mangroves are, so yeah, so you have to write the causes of depletion. So you will write that mangroves face a lot of threat today. Okay, and then you will start with the second main body, because this is how you build a connect. You can't just write introduction and then there is no link between your introduction and your main body and then you start it. No, so you will write one point, then second point, and then you will move towards your main part. Then here you will make a heading of causes of depletion of mangroves, and then you will start writing in points. Okay, so either you can divide it into two parts, natural and artificial or man-made. Okay, because mangroves have been depleting because of both reasons. See, what is the natural reason? That there was a tsunami, there was a flood, there was an earthquake. So because of that, mangroves got like actually depleted. Okay, then second might be the changing sea lines, because I mean sea level is rising, so mangroves might get underwater. So there might be many natural reasons also for this. Then what are the man-made reasons? See, then you will write that natural apart, it is basically the man-made reasons which have become the cause of concern, or which have become a concern because they are the major causes for depletion of mangroves. Now after this one, like man-made reasons, you will write the reasons like how man is actually leading to depletion of mangroves. A, by they basically they are they use mangrove is a tree, right, in the end. So mangroves they are using for their own needs, for like for fiber, for construction, for like for timber, etc. So they are over exploiting the mangroves and cutting them down. Secondly, you will find that they are they are practicing aquaculture in these mangrove regions, because they have this is a marshy area, this is like a wetland area, and then also they are again over exploiting that particular ecology. Then third is they might be actually like they mangroves, the area around the mangroves becomes a dumping ground, so they like it has basically a lot of pollution. So you will find that like plastic bottles and like these pollution items that we throw, right, so they all end up basically going to near the mangroves. So that is a problem. Then fourth might be that mangroves are a wetland region, so they have a lot of water, so people have started extracting more water out of mangroves, which makes it impossible for mangrove to survive. Okay, now, similarly, you will find that mangroves are being destroyed because there is a scarcity of land. So people need land, and you will find that people are either like cities are expanding. Then there are industrial towns also. Then even agriculture needs land. So because of all these reasons, finally it's the mangroves that are getting hurt. And then the fifth reason is the oil spill, etc. So if you know that there have been oil spills in nearby Sundarban region also, which have destroyed the Sundarban's mangrove region. So you can write here that oil spills have happened, and the shipping industry, the ports, etc. are also located in some of these regions, which actually threaten the ecology of the mangroves. Okay, and you can give an example also here about the Sundarbans that I gave you. Okay, and with the tsunami, you can give the example of the 2004 Indian tsunami. So that way what you have done is you've given examples, and you've also mentioned the causes of depletion of mangroves. Now after mentioning the causes of depletion, what you will do is you will make another heading, and you will write the importance of mangroves in coastal ecology. And here you will write that how mangroves are actually important for coastal ecology. And see, here you can either start writing in points, but what I will tell you is to divide it into four parts, and you can say that the four importance of mangroves basically can be divided into the following divisions according to Millennium Assessment Report. Okay, so this is a report which was published, which tells you that how biodiversity is important, because it gives you four things: provisioning, like provisioning things, then it gives you regulating, then it becomes you can say somewhere like cultural or recreational, and then you can also basically, it's okay, fine, let's just divide it into three parts, because then what will happen, you will have to divide it further again into two, and this will become impossible. So what you will do is you'll divide into three parts: provisioning, regulating, and recreational. And now you will write that what is the importance of mangroves in the coastal ecology. Or you can also divide it into like 2-3 parts, like economic part, environmental part, etc. But I think this is much better, because this is like relating to environment, and if you write this millennium assessment, you will get anyways like 1 mark extra. Okay, so here the game is about only 1-2 marks, and let's just not leave it. So in the mangroves, what you will write is basically how are they important. First of all, see, provisioning services, they are providing you with water. Okay, they are also providing you with provisioning services of timber, and they are also providing you with certain like leaves, etc. as a fodder you can use. Okay, similarly in the recreational, you can say that how Sundarban area is a very important national park and wildlife sanctuary. Okay, then here you will find that there is a lot of biodiversity, okay, which complements this particular region. Then what about the regulating services? That they are regulating groundwater. They are also helping you, like mangroves are a good storers of, provide you a good way of bioremediation. So they are actually helping you to control pollution. They are actually, helping you to bring rainfall also. Then they are harboring lot of biodiversity. So it helps you doing aquaculture. Then mangroves are also regulating the climate, the microclimate, okay, of the region. Okay, then you can say that how these mangroves basically they help you in maintaining the coastal ecology, because they help you maintaining the seashore, the sea line, because if mangroves are there, it will be impossible for sea to actually go inward. Similarly, they help the coastal regions to get protected from tsunamis and floods and cyclones, because mangroves are like see, if you actually know how a mangrove tree is, let me just draw it for you. So mangrove tree, no, it's a very bulky tree, okay, like this, like something like this, and it has basically roots coming like this, okay, pneumatophores, which we call them. So this is like a, okay, like this is the ground, and from here you will find that there are roots coming, okay, above, like this, from both the sides, and these are basically and these have pores, these are breathing roots, so that oxygen can reach them, and these are called as pneumatophores. Okay, apart from this, they also have roots coming from top, which we call as the buttress roots. Okay, and these roots help them to actually face the storm, face the cyclone, face the floods, and face the tsunami, okay, which is coming from the coastal region. So now imagine if this is a village which is, suppose there are like lot of trees like this here, okay, and then there is a village behind it. Do you think the village might have gotten impacted very much? Answer is no, because mangroves would have taken all the, like all the pain, and the village might have been saved from tsunami, etc. And that is why you realize that, see, you know how you'll end it. So what you will write is, you've written about the causes, you've written about their importance also now, and in the end you will write that recognizing their importance in the coastal ecology, there was a mangrove for future program that was started after the Indian tsunami of 2004, wherein like countries, Indian Ocean countries came together, so and decided that they will plant more mangroves, so that any such tsunami that occurs in future does not have as disastrous effect that it happened that time, because of the lack of mangroves. So here you have told that importance is not recognized only by the things that they're providing, but how their importance had been recognized in an international treaty also. And I'm betting you that nobody would have written mangroves for future program, and this is where you shine and rise. So this is me, Supriya, for you, and I hope that these answer writing practices and tactics are helping you. And if it is, then please write in, please do write in the comment box how are you liking it, and are you liking this session or not, or do you want us to include any more things? See, we have not included model answers as of now, but they will be given to you later. But my whole point was, see, model answers are of no help if you don't know how to write and what to include, because all if you go out in the market, you will find that all the institutes are giving you almost the same material. But the point is, how will you rise? If everybody gets 80, how will you get 100? The answer lies in this mangrove for future. Answer lies in this drawing the Buddhism diagram. Answer lies in the point that you are making the global warming graph and charts. So these are the little elements like which give you 2 marks extra, 3 marks extra, and you'll be able to score 110. With this positive note, we actually finished the lecture. Thank you.